So where are we as a football program? Well, we're about to find out next on Michigan Podcast.
There's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deeper into the front. Waits for it. It's caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific. Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris hacks a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Second. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again.
Go Blue and welcome to Michigan Podcast. I'm Steve Deace. This is the time now when we find out just how many strides our young football team here at the University of Michigan has made. More on that in a moment. But first, I want to welcome you to Michigan Podcast. Thanks for watching us here on YouTube. Please subscribe if you have not before. If you like us, click like. Leave a comment. I try to get to as many of them as I possibly can. You know, this time of year, my day job's a little busier than it is in the summertime or earlier in the season, so I don't have as much time to get to your comments, but I try to respond as often as I can right here on our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to us if you don't want the video, but just the audio. We make that available too via iTunes and our partners at Detroit Sports Podcast, which each week helps us to get the word out here about what we do at Michigan Podcast. And don't forget, follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. Well, we'll have another rendition of Football 101, breaking down the film from the win over Maryland, 35-10. Michael Spath from WTKA Ann Arbor will make his weekly appearance here on the show as he takes us inside the huddle. We'll have an update on the college football playoff situation, Big Ten power ratings, and more coming up here this week on Michigan Podcast. But I want to begin with something that's one of the wisest observations about college football I've ever heard. And it came from the leprechaun himself, Lou Holtz. I'm sorry, Holtz. My bad, Freudian slip there. Lou Holtz once said, and I quote, "The beauty or nightmare of coaching college football is that you're basically coaching a different team each week." And boy, is that not true. Look at what we just saw the last Saturday in college football. So we saw Auburn, which a month ago was struggling to beat Mercer, take the number one team in the country behind the woodshed with a 40-burger. All right, we saw that. We saw Mississippi State, which was struggling against a nobody at home 2 weeks ago. Likely, probably, maybe, should have beaten Alabama, mighty Alabama, before losing at the very end at home in Starkville. How about right here at home in the Big Ten? Iowa and Ohio State. What a juxtaposition that is, right? Buckeyes go to Iowa City, where we as Wolverine fans know dreams go to die, right? Buckeyes go to Iowa City, and it's like, snap, they forget how to play football, and they get annihilated. Even Iowa fans were like, we thought we might have a chance to win. Never thought it was going to be like this. Most points they've ever scored on Ohio State. They've been playing them for like 130 years. And then the next week, Iowa goes to Wisconsin. Looks like it's forgotten how to play football in the first half on Saturday against the Badgers. Iowa, which could do no wrong against Ohio State, dialing up plays we haven't seen since Hayden Fry was telling Chuck Long, run some exotics at him. At halftime against Wisconsin, they had 20 total yards, and they were 0 for 7 on third downs. It's just a nut. It's a crazy sport, guys. It's a nut, and the sport's nuts. Then you have Ohio State. Michigan State's kind of had their number, right? Actually, they've won, I think, their last 2 trips into Columbus. Yeah, well, that was a season's worth of reality checks that Michigan State suffered in the span of one game against Ohio State, and that is how all these teams change in just a matter of weeks, sometimes in the matter of 1 week. So as we look at these final 2 games for the University of Michigan, and so here's what it means for us as the Wolverines. When I look at these next 2 games, and I'm a data guy, you guys know that. I throw data nuggets at you all the time on this show. I do a lot of research that goes into this show. When I look at this analytically, I don't like our chances. All right? I mean, Saturday we're going on the road. We haven't beaten a ranked team on the road since number 2 Notre Dame in 2006. All right? To put that in perspective, Brandon Peters was eating paste, I think, in the 2nd grade the last time that happened. He's our starting quarterback on Saturday. We may be without Karan Higdon. We might be without Lavert Hill, maybe the best corner in college football, certainly one of them. It's probably not good. On the other hand, Wisconsin is going for 11-0 for the first time in program history. They've never really been the hunted. Even the years where they went out and won those Rose Bowls with Barry Alvarez, they were an underdog in all those Rose Bowls but one against Stanford. Most of the time, they came from 3rd or 4th predicted finish in the league to win it, usually, behind Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State in the preseason, who typically bore the brunt of preseason expectations. This is a rarefied air the Wisconsin program's never really had right now. Game day is coming this weekend. All week long on campus, they've been told the Wolverines are a wounded animal. You got this. We're on our way to being undefeated heading into the Big Ten championship game. We have no idea how they'll respond to that, right? We didn't really know how they'd respond against Iowa because they hadn't played a team with a pulse pretty much all year long. Well, then they came out and took them behind the woodshed. How do they respond now to, we're all that in a bag of chips? Wolverines are often the most dangerous when they're wounded. So on paper, it doesn't look good, which is why the spread opened up at Wisconsin by 10. But when you throw in those factors with Wisconsin, who also has a turnover-prone young quarterback and some key injuries as well, that's why the odds makers had the line quickly down to 7.5 because the early money came in on Michigan with all of those points. We don't know because Lou Holtz is right. You're really coaching a new team every week. I wouldn't take the result of the Wisconsin game, win or lose, and extrapolate anything out of it for Ohio State the following week because that's a rivalry game. I go back to 2013. That's the Brady Hoke win for 2 game we should have won probably. There was nothing heading into that game that indicated Michigan was going to be in that position. Nothing. It really had been a dreadful last month or so of the year. There was nothing there to indicate we would be in that position. I go back to the year that half the Big House was scarlet and gray. That was 2009, Rich Rodriguez's 2nd year. They won the game comfortably. I don't believe they covered the spread in that game, though. I mean, when you have a rivalry game, I think Michigan could pull the upset Saturday or get curb stomped. And I really don't believe, unless there's several more key injuries, that anything that happens on Saturday in Madtown is going to have any bearing on the way Michigan plays against Ohio State, because I think that game's going to get treated as its own separate season. But you know what? We really don't know that either. Because again, Lou Holtz is right. You really are coaching a different team each week. So here's my advice. We only get 12 of these games, and I have to take my own advice a lot. I get worked up too because I love my team, just like you do. But we only get 12 of these games. We've got the next 8 months after the bowl game to pontificate, to extrapolate, to contemplate. Wait until then. Let the season play itself out. Enjoy the journey because we've got a long long, did I say long, off season to break it all down and give our elevator pitches and 10,000-foot views and sweeping conclusions for now. Hey, if I'd have told you on this podcast last week Auburn was going to beat Georgia 40-10, what would you have said? If I had told you that Iowa would turn around and get absolutely annihilated by a Wisconsin team that, you know, they've played very well against, and they just annihilated Ohio State, what would you have said? If I told you Stanford was going to come home against Washington and beat them pretty soundly, what would you have said? That's why they play the games. This portion of Michigan Podcast brought to you by Sport Court of Michigan. If you're looking to put the ball in your court, like how much would you like that maize and blue Jumpman to be your actual court? Well, Sport Court of Michigan, they can make it happen. From basketball to tennis to batting cages to hoops, if you need anything athletic in your backyard, just give them a call. They're based out of Michigan, and they're ready to install your court sooner than you would expect. If you are in the Southeast Michigan area or in Ann Arbor, Tim Barnes will personally walk you through the process of having your dreams of a professional court in your backyard. Just visit him at sportcourtmi.com. Now, if you live outside of Southeast Michigan and you need a hoop for your driveway or your yard, they've got you covered there too at monsterhoops.com. That's monsterhoops.com, and they'll ship it right to your door. Now, if you mention the Michigan Podcast to monsterhoops.com, you're going to save $100 on your purchase at monsterhoops.com. If you mention Michigan Podcast to sportcourtmi.com, you could save up to $1,000 on your backyard game court, depending on the package you have selected. So sportcourtmi.com, michiganpodcast.com, and for that discount, tell them that Michigan Podcast sent you. And now we're joined on Michigan Podcast by our weekly friend, Michael Spath from WTKA Ann Arbor, also the Michigan Insider. By the way, there's a few segments. I listen to Michael's show as much as I can because it lines up perfectly with when I'm at the gym. But there's a few segments I highly recommend. One of them was today, the weekly media roundtable. There's always a good confluence of opinions there. So that's definitely something. If you're looking to sample Michael's show, I think that's a really good place to start. And Michael, it's good to have you with us. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great, Steve, and I really appreciate that. We had Nick Baumgardner from the Detroit Free Press and Mark Fallhauer from the June Mike podcast, who's a very informed Michigan football fan, on the show today. And I thought they both did a great job, and they're kind of right in line with where I am for this Michigan football team going into this week, and that's a great opportunity. Phenomenal opportunity for Michigan football after the first 10 games of the season, everything that's been building towards this moment. And so far right now, the season's about they've won 8 games, but they don't have a signature win on their schedule. And they've got 2 tough losses. And right now, unfortunately, the losses dominate the narrative for Michigan football. And so this is an opportunity right here to rewrite the story for Michigan in 2017.
You know, Michael, I think we discovered just a moment ago the secret to your success. I'm really impressed with the affirmations on the wall there behind you. I mean, and clearly you are good enough, you're smart enough, and doggone it, I think I speak for every Wolverine fan when I say we like you, indeed.
Well, I appreciate it. You know, it's funny, the last couple of weeks, I've done this show from my kitchen. I've done this podcast from the Pizza House Garage Bar, and now I run in my friend's house, and his Wi-Fi stunk. So now I'm actually at my chiropractor's office. I'm sitting in the private office of my chiropractor, and I'm assuming that his kids, he's got some young kids, and I'm assuming that they put that up on the wall behind me.
Now, there's 2 ways to look at that. One is he will do this from anywhere just to get it over with. The other is we are of such a sense of urgency, he will make it happen by any means necessary. And I only believe in positive reinforcement, Michael, so I'm going to go with the latter. If it's the other, just lie to me and don't tell me. Okay?
No, it's 100% of what you just said. I mean, I enjoy this podcast every week, and I was going to be running around doing meetings all day today. And so I found a way to my chiropractor's a really good guy. He's a sponsor for the show. and I was able to find a way to work it out with him that I could come in here and just use his private office, and because I want to do this. Otherwise, we probably would have been at Pizza House in about in a couple hours, and probably would have been loud, and it would have been cold, and I would have been like sitting there shivering, and so this is a much better setup here.
Well, thank you, chiropractor, for us. We appreciate having you with us here on Michigan Podcast. What I like about what you were doing both yesterday on your show, but also today, is trying to encourage fans to actually have a level of expectation. And I think that for fans, on one hand, it's short for fanatic, and we go to extremes, but I think we need to understand, when you hire a coach like Jim Harbaugh, this is not Brady Hoke. We're not apologizing for some pregame ritual to fire up the team, nor is it Rich Rodriguez trying to establish himself in a foreign culture. This guy is the very embodiment of Michigan football. I mean, it's his DNA. He comes out of this gene pool. We can't possibly, unless we're just insane, have higher expectations than they do inside Schembechler Hall. So, one, I think we need to give ourselves permission to have expectations. But I think often maybe the reason we don't is I think there's a fear that, well, if I have this expectation and they don't meet it, well, then it sounds like I want to fire the coach. And since I have no outcome over the result of them not meeting the expectation, then I can't have expectations. You know what I'm trying to say? That there's no 100%. There's no discernment between fire everybody or we have to be better than this.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I posted something today on social media, and I was talking about, this is a must-win game for Michigan. It's time to put the excuses to the side and to win a game that you're not supposed to win a big game under Jim Harbaugh. And I immediately, as soon as I posted this, I got a couple that said, or what? Mm-hmm. And I said, or it's a disappointing season. They're like, no, or they're going to fire Jim Harbaugh. And some people are so adamant about defending Jim when he doesn't need them to defend him,
right,
that they automatically go to this place where if you're not satisfied, you're asking for Jim Harbaugh to get fired. And nobody's saying that. That's ridiculous. At the same time, I do think it is important that Michigan fans start raising the bar of expectations. When you hired Jim Harbaugh and people were complaining in the preseason, where do you have Jim Harbaugh ranked in among the best coaches in college football? If you have him in the 20s, then okay. Then a guy in the 20s comes into a program that's been down for a little while, you give him time to build it back up. Mm-hmm. But when you're talking about someone that you thought the moment you hired him was in the top 5 coaches of college football and maybe in the top 5 coaches of football overall, and you've got the likes of Nick Saban and Urban Meyer and Bill Belichick, and at this point now Dabo Swinney, you don't look at that guy and say, hey, it's going to be a 5-year slow build.
Right.
Take your time. I'm going to be patient with you, coach. You're hiring and paying a guy to be one of the top 3 coaches in college football. And so why do you not have expectations that one of the top coaches in college football is going to get the job done as soon as possible? That's where I'm at. I'm not saying that there's not realistic impediments to that they have a young team, that they've got a redshirt freshman quarterback in just his 3rd career start this weekend. There are definitely things that are handicapping this team. But there's things that handicap every team in college football. And we seem to just gloss over that. We seem to just make excuse for Michigan when we don't acknowledge that Michigan State's the 3rd youngest team in college football. That we don't acknowledge that, a couple years ago, Ohio State won a national championship with, guess what? Their 3rd string quarterback. So things like that happen. And for some reason, Michigan fans, I think you're dead on, Steve, is that they don't want to have those high of expectations, because if they fall short of that, then what are they going to do with it? They're going to be mad. Are they going to look for someone to blame? Are they going to say that Harbaugh needs to go and no one wants to get there? Are they just going to say, the season was a complete failure? What is it going to be? And but at the same time, you have to have high expectations, because when I hear people say to me, well, they're not ready to compete for a Big Ten title, they're not ready to beat one of these 2 teams on the road yet, or one of these last 2 games. It might be in 2019 before they're ready to be. I'm like, enough of that. You're Michigan, and you want to hold yourself up to this higher standard of leaders and best. You want to talk about the fact that you're the all-time leader in Big Ten championships. You want to talk about you're the leader of all-time in NCAA wins. Well, then start holding yourself up to that standard, and that standard is that you're going to expect Michigan to win these last 2 games, at least this one against Wisconsin.
How much, Michael, because I think you might be uniquely qualified to answer this, because from the time you came out of Michigan and worked at the Wolverine, and you have therefore been at an outlet that was very close to the team and the administration and the coaching staff at the time. Now you're on radio, so you're kind of a conduit for the fan. So you're on both sides of this equation. And I've always wanted to know, because I've done this too, just not with Michigan, but with other teams I've covered and other sport media venues I've worked in, is I've often wondered how much the culture of the fan base really determines the expectation level of a team. And, when I did this before for a living full-time, social media didn't exist. It was just coming in. And so that adds an entirely new element where people are contacting the players directly on Twitter, Facebook, et cetera. It's impossible to not be aware of what's being said about you now. So I'm just wondering, can a fan base, I think this is frankly an argument Marcus Ray is making, a former Michigan player who also shows up every now and then on WTKA and actually every afternoon. But this is where he's angered, I think, some Michigan fans the last few years, is there's this, he calls it, I'm trying to tell the fan base to raise its expectation. A lot of fans take it as, well, you're trying to live out glory days, but he does make a point I think is worthy of considering, which is if we constantly have these disclaimers, these codicils, are we creating a culture around the team that can soften them? Do you buy into that at all?
I do to a little bit of an extent. I mean, I don't think that what I say on the radio, I don't think that random fan saying that he expects to win a national championship is getting into the ears of every single player on the team. But I do think that the entire culture is not just about what happens inside Schembechler Hall or what happens at Allen Park in Detroit for the Lions. I think it is all about, I mean, these especially in college, it's uniquely qualified because when these guys are done with practice, where do they go? They go to class. Mm-hmm. They go to study hall. They're at the parties. They are constantly around their fellow students. And while those fellow students are not stupid enough to challenge someone like Mason Cole or Rashawn Gary and say, hey, you suck or you're not getting the job done, because that'd be idiotic and we'd be hearing about someone being arrested and thrown in jail. The fact that the culture, it's all about what you do expect and how the fan base treats a team and how the team treats a fan base. And, you look at the very best programs, the very best organizations over the last 25, 30 years. And when you expect something, you essentially demand that your team rises up, and the team feels that. I truly believe the team feels that. I believe the coaches feel that. Yes, they have higher expectations than anybody else does. But if they only had high expectations, they didn't think the fans did, there might be a little bit of a lack of urgency. I think there's a greater urgency in programs like Alabama that demand that they win national championships. I think there's a greater sense of urgency at places like Ohio State. I think there's a greater sense of urgency and expectations at New England that is in places like the Detroit Red Wings for a long time, now the Chicago Blackhawks, the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Dallas Cowboys even. Your owner's constantly setting those expectations, and so the fans buy into it, the players buy into it, and everybody understands that they're going to be accountable, and if they don't get the job done, there are going to be consequences to that. And so I definitely believe that it's all about how everybody comes together. Are the fans 50% of it? Probably not. They're probably 25% of it, but that's a big 25%. And as long as you keep on making excuses and people call into talk show radio, or you have radio personalities like, it's too soon, it's too soon, it's too soon, all of that stuff kind of osmosis just filters into the program a little bit, and it definitely does have an impact on their psyche.
You're describing a culture, and the fans and our mindset and expectation level are a factor, and who knows how big of a factor it is, and sometimes it can be a positive or a negative one, but clearly when you're part of that subculture all around and how interconnected we all are in today's world, there's no way that it doesn't have some semblance of influence, at least a little bit. And when I take a look at that influence of fans, I go back to something I heard on your show a couple of weeks ago. You were having a conversation with John U. Bacon, the great the Michigan professor, New York Times bestselling author, and he challenged you on something. And he said that he bet if they open up the phone lines there at WTKA and took a poll and asked the audience, would you rather win at all costs or would you rather have character first and then win within those bounds? And you said you thought maybe a few years ago that was going to be a 100%er, but you weren't so sure anymore. John U. Bacon said, I still think that's pretty high of a notion, a high-minded ideal to Michigan fans. Is it, Ohio State's the one school Notre Dame had a dip. Alabama had a dip. Michigan finally was one of the last holdovers in the modern era to not have a dip, and then did, obviously in the Rich Rod era and then the Brady Hoke era. But Ohio State, say for 1 year, when Tressler got fired and they still went 6-6, they still went to a bowl game that year. But for that, they've never really had a multi-year dip. They're the one last elite program that has not. And I don't want to be one of those fans. Well, everybody that does better than us cheats to get recruits, things of that nature. Is there cheating? Yes. Do some schools cut corners academically? Yes. But what have you? But is there a thing where if no one would debate, if you and I went on WBNS in Columbus and opened up the phone lines, you want to win at all costs, or do you want to have character and maybe go 10-2, 9-3? I think we all know the vote, it's going to be like a vote in Chicago for mayor in the days of the mob. People are going to call 9 times, Michael, to vote, win at all costs, okay? When that is your culture, do we then as fans need to understand that that comes with a cost? And the cost is going to be, even when you do have an elite coach, you're going to have an 8-4 rebuilding year. He's going to have to cycle up because there's just certain things, even the things they let Jim do with private planes and his stunts and Rome and everything else that previous coaches wouldn't even thought to ask an administration to do. All right, he gets to do them. But even that, there's just a certain boundary line with, that kid's didn't go to class, missed a test. Nah, we don't do that here. There's just certain things Michigan isn't willing to do. And if that's who you are, cool, then just understand that you're probably going to have an 8-4 cycle up year every few years. And Lloyd Carr had those too.
Well, two things I want to respond to here. And the debate with John U. Bacon, he said that Michigan would rather win with integrity. And if you couldn't win with integrity, Michigan fans didn't want any part of it. And so they would be okay with being a consistent 8-4 team as long as they're doing things the right way versus, a gray area that Michigan walks into or a win-at-all-cost mentality that Michigan walks into. And Michigan fans would not be happy with that. And I honestly think that's complete bullshit. I seriously believe that at this point now where Michigan fans are so desperate, where Michigan is desperate to be the program that it once was, that you would have a fan base that says, if I could be Alabama, I would trade places with Alabama. I want to win. And I want to win, maybe not at all costs, but I'm willing to bend the rules. And I got to say, Steve, when you look at Jim Harbaugh and you talk about private planes and certain things like that, there have been things that he's already done that Michigan fans years ago would have bristled at. And that is, guys that get to their 5th year no longer guaranteed that 5th year.
Right.
There's a lot of guys that get
processing. Right? I was just going to bring that up. Right. Yeah.
They get processed out of the program. There's a lot of guys that younger years get processed out of the program. They've over-recruited. They had the issue with recruits in the past where they've recruited kids. They've received verbal commitments, and then a couple weeks, months before signing day, they're told, hey, time to move on. We're not really interested in you anymore. We found someone else that we like. So there's a lot of things that Jim Harbaugh has done already that are very SEC-like that people would have years ago would have been like, no, absolutely not. We're not processing kids out. We're not telling 5th-year seniors that want to come back they have no opportunity to come back here. We're not recruiting kids, accepting verbal commitments, and then showing them the door because we found somebody better. Those are all things that are happening right now at Michigan football, and nobody's blinking an eye about it because of why? Because it's Jim Harbaugh that's doing it, and because Michigan wants to win. So, to some extent, yes, I agree with you. Like, Michigan doesn't want to get in a position where they're paying players. Michigan doesn't want to get in a position where their kids are staying academically eligible just by letting them, fake papers and stuff like that, like North Carolina. No one wants to see that. But to tell you the truth, in today's college football, I don't think there's this rampant cheating that's going on. I think basketball is maybe a little bit different, but I don't think there's just rampant cheating going on. I don't think every kid that Alabama is signing, and Michigan just lost a kid, Emil Ekiyor, an offensive lineman from Indianapolis to Alabama. I don't think Alabama, they got him because they gave Emil Ekiyor $100,000, and Michigan wouldn't do that. I don't think that happens nearly as much as some people want to believe it happens. And the idea that, like, you can't compete with Ohio State, you can't compete with Alabama, you can't compete with Clemson because all those programs are cheating, and you're not, and so that's just going to mean that you can't ever win. I don't buy it, because when you actually look at the recruiting rankings year after year, Steve, look at the last couple of years and look at Michigan's recruiting success versus Clemson. Michigan has had better recruiting classes year in and year out for the last decade on a consistent level than Clemson has. And Michigan, Ohio State, and Alabama are kind of an anomaly. They're getting like 5 stars like you've never seen before. But look at the other programs that are competing for national championships. Oklahoma, Michigan's right there, right with them or ahead of them in the recruiting rankings. USC, Michigan's right there or ahead of them in the recruiting rankings. Georgia, Michigan's right there or ahead of them in the recruiting rankings. All these programs that are winning, with the exception of the two teams at the top that are kind of anomaly, Michigan's right there. So if they're getting all the same recruits, why can't they compete with those teams for championships then?
Well, let's get to the game on Saturday against Wisconsin. Wolverines have not beaten a ranked team on the road since Notre Dame when they were ranked number 2 at the beginning of the 2006 season. I went back and looked. I think by point spread, Michigan has not won a game straight up. It was an underdog since the first game under the lights against Notre Dame in 2011. All right, so 2 massive trends working against the Wolverines here. I opened up the show talking about Lou Holtz's axiom that the beauty, if not nightmare, of coaching college football is that you are literally coaching a different team each week. And we saw plenty of evidence in plenty of games, including 2 here in the Big Ten involving Iowa and Ohio State, from one week to the next. And we saw that, Auburn could barely beat Mercer at home last month. They 40-burgered the number 1 team in the country on Saturday. I mean, that's what you're dealing with. And yes, we know what Michigan's issues are. All right. But one of the mistakes I think fans make when we both underrate and overrate our teams, Michael, is we evaluate them as a standalone entity. And then you get into that whole Keith Jackson line from when we were kids, analyzing is paralyzing, right? You almost know too much, all right? And you forget that it's really your team in relation to the competition. It's not as a standalone entity. So I think most of our audience knows Michigan's issues. And you mentioned Brandon Peters, and I mentioned we may be without Karan Higdon, Lavert Hill, for example. They've got issues, though, too, that often our fans aren't aware of. They've had several key injuries. Their linebacking core was hit hard in camp. Another one of their best linebackers got hurt 2 weeks ago against Indiana. Their top pass catcher for the year is out. They've had other injuries at that position earlier in the year, too. Their outstanding freshman running back has been banged up the last couple of weeks. Alex Hornibrook has not developed, even against that very soft schedule. I mean, I think we're sitting here, if Brandon Peters holds on to the starting job, and like Peters, Hornibrook got put in middle of the year as a redshirt freshman last year. If we are sitting here at this point of next season and Peters has been the starting quarterback and he's got Alex Hornibrook's numbers, I think we're probably thinking Brandon Peters isn't the starting quarterback. Either Dylan McCaffrey or Wilton Spate or somebody else is. Yeah. So he hasn't really developed. Their schedule's been really Charmin soft. They obliterated an Iowa team that has not played very well on the road, although that was a very impressive win last week. And here's another factor that I think people aren't talking about enough. They've never been 11-0 before. Even all those years with Barry Alvarez and Brett Bielema, they were going to and winning Rose Bowls. One of those years, Brett Bielema went to a Rose Bowl. His team was 8-6. Most of those years, Barry Alvarez's team was picked 3rd, 4th, 5th in the Big Ten, behind Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. All those Rose Bowls they won, they were the underdog in every one, except the one against Stanford. So they have thrived off of being the underdog, like what they did to LSU 2 years ago when they were number 5 and Wisconsin was unranked at Lambeau. This is a program that has never been in this position before, never been 11-0. You have game day coming in. They are the standard bearer for the entire Big Ten. Their fans have been telling them all week, Michigan's not that good. You guys got this. I am just as fascinated to see how Wisconsin's going to react to this as I am Michigan.
No, and I think you're dead on. And, what we talked about earlier, Steve, about the culture and does the culture affect Michigan football. And, yeah, if you've got a fan base that all week is looking at this and a program in Wisconsin is looking at this not as an excited opportunity like, hey, look what we get to go do. We're playing our best football, and we get to go out there and show to the world that we belong in the college football playoff. And instead is thinking, boy, we're 10-0, and we can't lose this game. If we lose this game, we lose everything. And we've got to win it. We've got to win it. We've got to win it. Got to hope we don't blow it. Very often that impacts your confidence in the way that you prepare and the way that you approach the game, and you end up making those mistakes. And so I am very curious to see what happens with Wisconsin's psyche, their confidence, their level this week. And on the Michigan side, I mean, when you look at this game, you're right. It's not about comparing them to Ohio State or comparing them, to the top 5 teams in the country. It's just, can they beat Wisconsin? And the one thing that I look at and gives me a little bit of hope is that if I were to ask you what is Michigan's best game this year, you'd probably say Minnesota. They ran the ball all over Minnesota. They had a pretty good, solid defense. The passing game was special teams were but they ran the ball over Minnesota. Second best game, I don't know, maybe Purdue. I mean, we have not seen this team play its best football this year, certainly not on the offensive end. And so for me, when I'm looking at it, is if we never see this team's play its best football this year, that's going to be a huge disappointment. If the Minnesota game is the pinnacle of Michigan football in 2017, that was the best that they can play, then that to me is a huge, huge letdown. But I believe we haven't seen Michigan's best game yet this year. If you go back to last year, you could argue the Penn State game, maybe the Wisconsin game, but really probably their best game was the Ohio State game. And so here's where they're at. They've got a great Wisconsin team, at least it appears that way, ready to, what's the Wisconsin mindset at home this weekend? Michigan, go out there and play their best football game. If that happens and Wisconsin plays their best football game, I don't know, maybe it's a toss-up, but what you're kind of hoping is Michigan plays their best game, Wisconsin plays a little bit down, and I think that's ripe for an upset there.
So what's your prediction? Do you have one yet, or is it too early in the week?
I don't think it's too early in the week. I think from our conversations here, that I'm a big fan of the idea that like a leopard doesn't change its spots. Mm-hmm. And a zebra still has lines on it unless you're a referee. I mean, things like that, like you are who you are, right? And what Michigan football is a team that goes through periods of just utter frustration. They haven't been able to develop a passing game at all. Their wide receivers don't make any big plays. The running game, we've never seen them get it done against better competition. So until I see those things, I'm not just going to put a hope and a prayer out there and go like, oh, well, it'll finally come together this week for Michigan because I want it to.
Agreed.
I mean, that's a very naive way of looking at it. I think at
halftime of the Maryland game, I was like, I think we're going to win next week. By the end of the game, I'm where you are. I thought that game went from a positive to a loss leader. I mean, the whole story now is Harbaugh and Quinn Nordine and the injuries. It's like we never led that game 28-0 at one point, and the fans were leaving. I mean, that game to me was an encapsulation of what is so frustrating about this season. As you saw a glimpse of when they play clean, what all these guys he's recruited, even with a banged-up football team, are capable of. And then you saw the second half, which is frankly most of what we've seen most of this year, Michael.
Yeah. I'll say this. If Karan Higdon is not healthy, if he plays but he can't really do what he's been doing the last couple of weeks, I don't think Michigan wins this game, because I think the only way Michigan wins this game is if the running game that we've seen develop the last 3 weeks is legit. And it's legit if you have your best running back who establishes an offensive identity built on power and strength and toughness. If that guy's in there driving and grinding out yards and helping you get to 200 yards rushing, helping you have a 4.5 yards per carry, and creating big plays with the running game, and allowing Chris Evans to come in and be that change of pace back, and allowing Ty Isaac to come in and be that change of pace back, I think if he plays and he's good to go, then Michigan can win this game. If he's not, and you're relying on Chris Evans to be the in-between-the-tackles runner, and you're relying on a passing game to come out of the air that's never been there the whole season, and you're hoping that your defense just holds them to 10 points so you can win this game, 14-10, a little bit like last year, I don't think that's going to happen. To me, Karan Higdon is that important to what Michigan wants to do on Saturday, and for that reason, because I hear that he's banged up and he's got that ankle sprain that's going to limit him a little bit, I don't see Michigan winning this game, because I think the offensive struggles are going to come back. I think the passing game has been MIA, and it's going to stay MIA. And I think the running game is just going to struggle against a better team. I mean, that's what we've seen over the last 2.5 years is better teams, running game doesn't get it done. And if that follows the trend, then they're going to have a hard time moving the football offensively, and they're going to lose this game something like 24-14 or so.
So it's Bill Parcells versus Lou Holtz. Lou Holtz with, hey, you're a different team every week. Bill Parcells with, you are what your record says you are. That's what this game's about. And Michael Spath of WTKA and the Michigan Insiders going with Bill Parcells. Good to see you, brother. Thanks again.
I'm going with Bill Parcells. Yeah, right. That's where I'm at. I think that's one thing to be said when you're talking about week 6, week 5. When you're week 11, you are what you are, unfortunately.
Thanks, Michael. Good to see you. Tell your chiropractor we said hello, and those affirmations are adorable. Thank you.
Thanks, man. I'll let them know.
All right, take care. We'll come back. More Michigan podcast here in a moment. Hey, if you like what we do here at Michigan Podcast and you're willing to support us, we greatly appreciate that. This is a look at our Patreon page, Michigan Podcast, or patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. You can see there, by the way, you get my instant reaction podcast after every Michigan football game. And yes, once we get further into basketball season, I'm going to try to do as many of them after basketball games as possible as well. Those are exclusively for our Patreon supporters, as well as my free or my picks for the Michigan game, as well as the college football games against the point spread each and every week. Just extra content we like to produce for those of you that support what we do here, make it possible for what we do here. I know I get asked all the time, hey, can we get you guys to do more? The answer is yes. But to do more, we've got to justify it from a time and expense standpoint, and that's where our Patreon page comes in. So please consider supporting us there, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Well, it's now time to go inside the film room. Michigan's victory over Maryland. How'd they do it? Now we find out.
Welcome to Football Film Review with Benny Chopra and Michael Spath, reviewing the Michigan-Maryland game from last Saturday. And our first play is about 9:10 to go in the first quarter. And Michigan running a lot of zone early in the game. Here they get back to power.
Yeah, so we talked about last week that Michigan is going to keep on running this power scheme, counter scheme, out of a bunch of different formations. And here we see it with no fullback and 3 tight ends in the game. And they're going to swap responsibilities. The guard's going to pull and kick out the end this time instead of pulling for the front side linebacker. And the tight end McCune's going to come all the way around and get through to the front side linebacker. And he does a really good job of finding the hole here and finding who's got to block. And we pop it up inside there for a nice little gain.
You mentioned, too, I mean, you've been high on the tight ends, and Zach Gentry does a good job here sealing it off the edge, too.
Yes, the tight ends are doing a great job all year, and they kept on doing a great job this game as well.
Benny, the very next play for Michigan, 8:30 to go in the first quarter, and a little bit of a different look here, maybe a little bit of a read option, not that Brandon Peters was ever going to keep the ball, and a terrific job by Zach Gentry and Mason Cole.
Yeah, the Maryland front is going to move slant on us a little bit here, and Gentry does a great job, good footwork, just watches this guy down and creates a big hole, and Michigan showing more wrinkles in the run game, like you said earlier, with the read option. Highly unlikely that Peters was going to keep it, but just another wrinkle that Michigan shown earlier in the season, and they're showing again now.
And it looks like Mason Cole gets up to the second level, and we've talked about it multiple times. If you're going to have these bigger gains, you got to get up to the second level, and that's what he does here. Yeah,
he does a good job. He sees the slant, and he knows that linebacker is coming around, so he gets up on the front side linebacker and creates some more room for Chris Evans to run.
5:53 to go in the first quarter, and Maryland tries to run similar to what Minnesota had some early success against Michigan. Not quite a jet sweep, but having the wide receiver pull and trying to get to the outside and use speed, and Michigan just had no part of that.
Yeah, it's very similar to what Minnesota was doing last week. And you see Mike McCray here. He sees it on the motion. He's widening and attacking. He sees this play coming from a mile away and gets upfield and makes the receiver cut back up inside, and there's 2 guys sitting there waiting for him, Chase Winovich and Devin Bush. But Michigan obviously worked on this during the week, and great job defending it here.
38 seconds to go in the first quarter, and Maryland's already come up with a couple of really clever plays trying to take advantage of Michigan's aggressiveness, and here kind of they get one out to the outside, and Josh Metellus really blows this play up by coming hard down from a safety spot, and his teammates rally the football for the big 14-yard loss.
Yeah, you'll see here Maryland tried to set up 2 picks on Mike McCray, and the picks work, but Josh Metellus is there, makes a good play, keeps his feet, keeps the offensive player in front of him, and the Maryland running back makes a bad decision and starts running backwards, and just shows Michigan here rallying to the football, and everyone's getting in on the tackle here. 6-7 guys surrounding the football.
14:45 to go in the second quarter, and sometimes the best play is not to extend it and throw the ball downfield, but just to throw to the guy that's right in front of him that gives a chance to get some positive yards. And here, Brandon Peters rolling out to his right, and instead of trying to throw it away or go downfield, he hits Cron Higdon, his outlet receiver, for a big gain.
Yeah, right off the bat here, Maryland has a free shot at Peters, who took a big one last week, and here he avoids the defender and keeps on kind of scrambling and is able to dump it off to Higdon, who does all the rest of the work here. And the receivers, once again, doing a great job downfield, blocking guys like they have been, especially the last 2 weeks.
What happens here at the right tackle position, too? Because this is the kind of one of the things we've been talking about. Jerome Bush-Obedi doesn't even see the defensive end. He thinks what they're slanting, they're moving their protection to the left, and he just doesn't.
I think they're having a slide protection here and some sort of miscommunication because that shouldn't be happening. But I don't know what his blocking assignment was in that particular play. But you never want a free guy running at the quarterback.
11:25 to go in the second quarter, and as a former tight end, Benny, you had to really enjoy this, especially number 83 was the one, Zach Gentry, getting about a 25-yard touchdown pass here.
Yeah, Michigan's going to come out, run 4 verticals after the change of possession here, after the fake punt that didn't work. And Michigan's been taking shots every time they get across the 40-yard line into the opponent's territory. We ran the same play 2 weeks ago against Minnesota, and we ended up checking it down to Higdon. And now on this play here, they're going to have a little different motion to it, but ends up being 4 verticals. Looks like Maryland had a little bit of a busted coverage, and Peters finds Gentry wide open, makes a good throw, and a touchdown for Michigan.
9:13 to go in the second quarter, and it's our favorite play, Benny, that we talk about consistently, and this is the toss sweep. Michigan's gotten really good at these. Here they use Khalid Hill in motion to kind of play the position that the tight ends have done and seal this off the edge and allow the 2 pullers to get around the outside.
Yeah, Michigan started doing this quite a bit more, where they're actually going to pull the backside and the front side guard on the sweep here. They do a really good job getting out front. Khalid Hill gets up with the linebacker with Peoples-Jones. Peoples-Jones, gets up on the safeties. Mason Cole does a good job sealing off the edge. And then you have Shanley downfield getting a block there too. And Higdon runs through some arm tackles and picks up 12, 14 yards.
It didn't look as smooth as it has in the past, but you had more blockers than they had defenders, and that's all that you're going for.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why you're pulling those two guys to gain an extra blocker over there.
Well, Benny, when you're running the ball as well as Michigan, it's consistently the last couple of games, and teams are geared towards defending the run near the goal line. They're not going to be ready for play action and rolling out and throwing to the tight end like Michigan does for its 4th touchdown of the game.
Yeah, Sean McCune here is going to come all the way across the formation, act like he's blocking Michigan with a great play action fake. And, Maryland doesn't have a prayer here of covering this. Michigan's been running the ball too well, and we've shown the same play before, and McCune comes wide open for a 2nd touchdown of the year.
Yeah, how hard, when you see him pulling like that, and you saw him pull earlier, and that was a running play, how hard is it to think that it's anything other than a running play?
Yeah, that too. And the other, he gets through the traffic here is the other good thing. He could have it's easy to get caught up in the defenders and not be able to break free. And, he does a good job navigating the traffic and getting into the open.
2:54 to go in the second quarter. Maryland with its best chance, but when you get pressure and the quarterback here gets hit by Rashawn Gary, Josh Awuzie, sometimes you got to get rid of that ball early, and that leads to mistakes, and that leads to an interception here.
Yeah, the Maryland quarterback here under heavy pressure makes a throw, and David Long does a great job, though, falling off his guy and able to make a play on the football and a great return. But like you said, the pressure really affected the Maryland quarterback all day, and especially here on this play, resulted in a long, much overdue Michigan interception.
And you've talked before about David Long, about one of the things he does well is that he will recognize sometimes about coming off his man to make a play.
Yeah, he does a really nice job here, just kind of falling back, realizes they need to throw the ball in the end zone here on 3rd and goal. He's playing smart football, makes a aggressive return here out of the end zone 5 yards deep and brings it back almost 80 yards.
11:20 in the third quarter, Benny, and if there's a concern about the Michigan defense, especially as they get ready to play JT Barrett and Ohio State in a couple of weeks, is that they have really struggled with the read option. Here's another big gain for an opponent running the read option and keeping it with the quarterback.
Yeah, it's been the read option's been giving us issues all season. Typically we're giving up one big run a game to the read option, and you got to give credit to the Maryland quarterback here. He does a great job carrying out the fake here. Really fools the defense. You can see Mike McCray thinks the running back has it for a second, and when he realizes the quarterback has the ball, it's too late, and he's down the field for a 25, 26-yard gain.
Well, if you notice, too, it looks like obviously Devin Bush is in man coverage because he takes himself out of the box and follows one of the running backs out of the play.
Yeah, really well designed play and really well executed. You can't say enough about the fake, the mesh of the quarterback and the running back there.
5:40 to go in the fourth quarter. And they put together a scoring drive here, and a nice run by Chris Evans. Shows off a lot of athleticism, some great blocking by the tight ends.
Yeah, really good job. Sean McKeon comes across the formation, kicks out the defensive end. Bushel Beatty does a great job on the front side. And then Gentry does a wonderful job staying with his guy and, creating the block that's going to spring the run, allow the run to get around the corner. And this is how hard this is, a block this is for Sean McKeon to make it. He makes it look really, really easy.
Yeah, and Chris Evans, you just can't teach what Chris Evans does sometimes.
Yeah, the nice little hurdle.
2:30 to go in the fourth quarter. Our final play we're going to do, Benny, and something we haven't seen from Michigan yet this year, kind of like a delayed draw that allows Mason Cole to get out in front and block for Chris Evans.
Yeah, we haven't seen Michigan run the draw very much at all this year, and here near the end of the game, Michigan decided to take a look at this play, and it's blocked up pretty well. Guys getting downfield. Mason Cole does a nice job pretty much blocking two people, and you can see Kugler down there getting downfield as well.
Ian Bunting, and Chris Evans was big for Michigan in the second half and in the fourth quarter especially, kind of solidify this one. Well, that was our plays this week. We'll be back next week to break down the Michigan-Wisconsin game.
This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you, was the 35-10 victory over Maryland the last game Michigan will win this season until the bowl game? Basically, we asked you, do you think they're going to beat Wisconsin or Ohio State? 41% of you said yes, this is the last game Michigan will win until the bowl game. 59% of you said no. My mind is saying yes, but my body's saying no. But if it was me, I want to click. I want to say, no, it's not the last one. I kind of think it might be. But again, like I said at the top of the show this week, we had a young team. Really, the only position I'm concerned about going forward is the development at quarterback. Even with young tackles next year, I think we're going to be really good on the interior of the line. And I think we learned under Brady Hoke when we had two guys, including a first-round draft pick, and another one started in the Super Bowl. Those were two guys starting at tackle, and we couldn't block a lick. All right, so if I have a choice between breaking in tackles and having a stout interior or breaking in the interior and having stout tackles, I'm going to take the interior. So I like the makeup talent-wise of our team. I think there's depth and athleticism everywhere. My only concern is quarterback. So I'm willing now. I realized after Penn State we weren't a championship team, and that's okay. You can't win it every year, and apparently you can't win it every 14 years. But it's not that I'm sad or depressed. I'm cutting myself. Anyway, back to the show. This week's question of the week. Is there a team year after year more hyped than Notre Dame? Asks Danny Britton. It's like the talking heads are trying to will something that isn't. There is some truth to that, except with this Notre Dame team, until they ran into the turnover chain in the University of Miami. I love the turnover chain. I know I'm middle-aged and white, and it shouldn't be my thing, but I just think it's so cool. I love it, okay? But until they ran into the turnover chain, Notre Dame's resume absolutely was deserving of being a top 4 team. So clearly they showed on Saturday night, not even by losing the game, but by virtue of just not even at any point athletically being competitive in it, they showed they're not an elite team. But that doesn't take away from the resume that they built early in the year. And we're still talking about a team that was 4-8 last year. We were talking about firing Brian Kelly. So it's still one heck of a turnaround season for Notre Dame. And I think when the college football playoff rankings come out tonight, I'm pretty confident that they will be ranked in the top 10. Here's my Big Ten power ratings this week. Ohio State, Wisconsin are the top 2 slots. Michigan State, Penn State, and Michigan round out the top 5. You see Northwestern there having their typical second half surge, and Iowa drops to number 7. Now, if I were on the college football playoff committee tonight, these would be my top 4. I'd have Alabama number 1. I'd have Oklahoma number 2. I think their overall resume, teams they've beaten, they have quality wins against both TCU and now also Ohio State on the road. So I'd put them there. I think Clemson's resume overall is also more impressive than Miami of Florida's. But if you want to tell me Miami deserves to be number 2, I'm not going to argue with you. Really, there's no point in arguing until we get to the end of the year. The last one that determines what really happens. So as long as you're in the top 4 at this point, it doesn't matter if you're number 1 or number 4. It really does matter, though, a little bit later on, but we're not at that point quite yet. If I had to vote in the Heisman Trophy race, if I had to vote this week, for me, it would be Baker Mayfield, Baker Mayfield, Baker Mayfield. Maybe the only name on my ballot, but since I got to have 2 more, let's give a little love to Kerryon Johnson at Auburn. What an insane game he had against a terrific Georgia defense on Saturday. One of the best individual performances any players had this year. And then Bryce Love is back in the mix, injured against Oregon State. You saw his team nearly lose that game. And then they come right back and beat Washington when he gets back in the lineup, and he's out there on an ankle and a half and carries his team with 166 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he's back on the list. But again, Baker Mayfield of Oklahoma is so far ahead that I think he's got to have a facepalm meltdown to not win it at this point. So we're really talking about who else gets invited to New York for the ceremony. And that's it. We're done. Yeah, I heard the music. I'm like, are we done? Yeah, we're done. Thanks for tuning in to Michigan Podcast. Thanks to Detroit Sports Podcast for getting the word out. All of you for watching, listening. We'll see you next week. Go Blue.